Welcome back to my X-Men series. For those of you who are new here, I'm going through each of the X-Men movies and reviewing them one by one. This is coinciding with both the series' 20th anniversary and the release of the final film of the franchise, The New Mutants, which is out now, and I actually have a theater by me now open, so I'm going to try to get to it soon. Let me know what you think of the X-Men movies in the comments below, and make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews. It helps me out immensely if you do that. I already reviewed the first 3 movies, and I'll leave a link to that in the description in case you missed any of them. And if you're new here and you like movies, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with my reviews on the rest of the series. But now, let's talk about the 4th film in the franchise, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Hugh Jackman once again returns as Wolverine, and this time we follow him and his brother Victor, aka Sabretooth, this time played by Liev Schreiber, as they fight on a team called Team X for William Stryker, this time played by Danny Huston. However, Wolverine walks away from the team and settles down, but several years later, his old teammates get murdered one by one, which sets him out to fight once more. Before we begin, I'm going to give a spoiler warning. I usually do spoiler-free reviews for newer releases, but with older movies, I'll break that rule, especially because there are some notable plot points we really need to discuss. So if you haven't seen this by now and you really want to check it out, this is your spoiler warning. But anyway, here we go. I think for the longest time, this went down as the most hated X-Men movie. Probably still is for a lot of people, depending on who you ask, because there's a lot that was done wrong here, but I wouldn't say this was totally the writer or director's fault necessarily. This time around, it's co-written by Skip Woods, who also wrote The A-Team, along with Game of Thrones co-creator David Benioff. And the director here is Gavin Hood, who I'm pretty sure received a lot of hatred for this movie, but he's actually a pretty good director in his own right. His adaptation of Ender's Game was pretty decent, and his 2015 thriller Eye in the Sky is very underrated. But this movie was plagued by a lot of problems. Hood and the Fox executives frequently clashed over the creative direction, including one instance where Hood was offset briefly and one of the executives took it upon themselves to repaint one of the sets while he was gone. Tensions were so bad they actually had to fly out Richard Donner, who was married to one of the producers, to ease tensions. That was wild. On top of all that, Jackman had a very busy schedule, the weather kept causing delays, and there were issues getting the screenplay finished. And I kind of remember hearing this at the time, but an unfinished version of the screenplay leaked online, which caused a huge fuss. This movie had nothing but doom written all over it. And yeah, the final result's kind of a mess. I actually don't despise this like most people do, but you can tell this movie was working off a rushed screenplay because a lot of it feels rushed. It'll jump from point A to point B at times, sometimes with no logical explanation of how they got there, on top of it doing so many time jumps that it never allowed you to just have a moment. I mentioned in my X-Men The Last Stand video how it pivoted from the first 2 movies' style of being deep character dramas to being more of a mindless blockbuster without much of the character development. And what saved it was the fact that we spent so much time with these characters from the first 2 movies, it helped us stay invested. This continues that same style of The Last Stand, but now with an entirely new set of characters. While Sabretooth and Stryker return in this movie, they're both played by different actors, making Jackman the only main cast member returning in a substantial role, minus a quick Patrick Stewart cameo. So now we don't have the attachment to any of these characters like we did in The Last Stand. So when there's supposed to be a huge moment, we don't care as much as we should. One of the most egregious examples of this is when there's a 6-year time jump and we find out Wolverine's now living with his girlfriend Kayla, played by Lynn Collins. It's like maybe a half hour or so into the movie, and we only spend like 10 minutes or so with this character. We only see a couple of scenes where they're together, and we don't really learn much about her, if anything at all. And then we're led to believe she's killed by Sabretooth, and Wolverine's upset, but I don't know how there's supposed to be any sort of emotional impact. It's treated like a big dramatic moment, but we spend barely any time with her, so it's hard to feel the weight of the situation when this happens. You find out later she's alive later on, but still, it's hard to care considering how little time there was spent with her to begin with. But after this fake death scene, Wolverine somehow puts 2 and 2 together that it was Sabretooth and figures out where he is almost instantly, which is this random bar where they get into this huge fight. This is where you can really tell they're working with a rushed screenplay, because there's no logical conclusion that led him to figure all that out so conveniently. I mean, unless he had spidey senses. It's like they wanted to get them to fight but couldn't figure out a way to get to that point and just figured, hey, they're brothers, he had a feeling, or something. I don't know. Either way, it was just poor writing. And like I said, it doubles down on the mindless blockbuster feel of The Last Stand, but actually takes it a step further, because some of the scenes are so over the top and so cartoonish. I think the best example being when Wolverine stays with this older couple almost halfway through. I remember in the first 2 X-Men movies, Wolverine explains how it hurts him whenever he uses his claws, and we even see flashbacks in those movies of the pain he's going through when he's in Stryker's lab. Here though, it's played for comical effect. Like, he accidentally destroys the old couple's bathroom while checking out his adamantium claws, which look really fake, by the way. I mean, I know the effects from the other X-Men movies before this still look a little dated, but they look pristine compared to how Wolverine's adamantium claws looked here. And then there's this huge fight when he's doing these ridiculous stunts, like jumping off a motorcycle to get to a helicopter, and then there's that infamous moment where after it crashes, he lights it on fire and walks away from it, and it explodes behind him, which is like right out of a cheesy 80s action movie. Like, it's just so stupid. Like, I know Wolverine's always supposed to be the cool X-Men, but there's also a lot of nuance to him as well, and this just strips away all that depth and turns him into a generic action star. But Jackman certainly tries. I will say right up front, he is without a doubt the single best thing about this movie. I'm not saying he saves it, but I've said this a few times in other videos, Hugh Jackman is one of the best actors working out there right now, and even when the movie itself is bad, he still manages to take something terrible and make it feel like gold. But there are a lot of times where it's impossible to take this movie seriously. It's a tonal mess. There are comedic moments that are just cringeworthy, while there are serious moments that are unintentionally funny. For example, there's this running setup in different scenarios where Wolverine's angry, and he'll do the most cliched thing possible and just scream in the air whenever he's upset over something. It just looks absolutely silly. Even Jackman can't save that. And probably the biggest example of really bad forced comedy is the fight between Wolverine and the Blob, played by Kevin Durand. He's trying to get information from him about the rest of the team, and it turns into this boxing match because Wolverine calls him Bub, and he goes, "Did you just call me Blob?" And he challenges him to a fight. It is so dumb, it's not even funny. Like, I think there should be some humor in superhero movies, I've said that countless times before, but this is just so cartoonish and feels so forced. Like, the other X-Men movies had quips, but here, it's like they felt obligated to give us flat-out comedy routines, and not even good ones at that. It's just terrible on every level. One of the biggest points of criticism I've heard from a storytelling perspective is the fact that we get this great montage over the opening credits of Wolverine and Sabretooth fighting all these wars, the Civil War, both World Wars, the Vietnam War, and everyone was upset because it kind of just glossed over these because there was so much history that could have been explored there. And I agree. And sure enough, it turns out Gavin Hood wanted to explore this idea of Wolverine having PTSD from being in all these wars, and Fox told him no. And this is exactly why I hate studio interference. Let creators create. Because honestly, that would have been great to explore, especially if they kept this centered on Wolverine's time in Team X, because actually I kind of like this part of the movie. The dynamic among the whole group was fun. The fights here were a little over the top, but not in a cartoonish sort of way. This is the only time where it towed the line of being a little silly, but not too silly. And there were some great themes that could have been explored. The reason Wolverine leaves them so quickly is because the rest of the team showed this lack of empathy. So imagine this great movie about a soldier who lives for so long, who has PTSD from all these wars, and gets recruited to be on this cold, heartless team of mutant killers. That would have been fantastic in my opinion. Like, they had a huge missed opportunity there. Especially because we could have explored some great family dynamics about how Wolverine and Sabretooth drift apart and how Stryker may have helped drive that rift. Both Liev Schreiber and Danny Huston did well here with what they were given. They were the other two best performances here after Jackman, but there was an opportunity for them to both really shine if they went down a different path here. Speaking of Team X, let's talk about the one thing that pissed nearly everyone off about this. Deadpool. Now, I wasn't a Deadpool fanatic prior to this movie because I never read the comics, so it didn't annoy me as much at the time. It's definitely disappointing to see in hindsight, though, after seeing the two Deadpool movies, because Ryan Reynolds is great in the Team X scenes. He captured for what I'm sure fans were hoping for at the time with this character. He's funny, he's energetic, he's constantly running his mouth, and then they sew his mouth shut. There's not much I can say that hasn't been said already about that. It sucks. It's not that good. He also just gains other mutants' powers, like he has Cyclops eye beams, which I don't know there. We all know at this point it wasn't true to who the character was, so I'll leave it there as far as that goes. But as far as a villain, because he's supposed to be the big villain in the end, it's really not an emotionally satisfying fight. For one thing, again, the effects are terrible. The backgrounds look fake, as did some of the effects like the eye beams. And even from just a character standpoint, he shows up in like the last 20 to 30 minutes of the movie after having not been seen since like the 30-minute mark, give or take. He's been gone for more than half the movie, and he comes back as this silent killer for this big final fight. I'm not saying you can't effectively pull off having a silent killer villain. I mean, the Halloween franchise was built around that, and that's been pretty successful. But it's not satisfying when it's a character who was barely seen in the movie to begin with, and then just reappears in the last 20 minutes with a totally different personality. Reynolds was great in the scenes where he could talk, but it wasn't like we spent that much time with him that it makes for an emotional impact in the end. Plus, there aren't any hints of the character we saw in the beginning hidden underneath. Even as problematic as Phoenix was in The Last Stand, at least that somewhat worked because we saw hints of the old Jean Grey. This might as well have just been a new character altogether. Like I said, there's barely even a hint of the character we saw in the first half hour, and because of that, I really couldn't care. It was a lackluster fight that made for a stale ending to a mediocre movie. I don't exactly hate this movie, mainly because it has a solid first 30 minutes or so, and Hugh Jackman's performance is once again great, but it's still bad. It strips all the nuance away from the X-Men series and just turns into this cartoonish, one-dimensional action movie with little of the emotion that made the first two movies, and to an extent the third movie, enjoyable. The effects are bad, the writing's not that great, and there was way too much studio interference that prevented it from being the great movie it could have potentially been. X-Men Origins Wolverine gets a 5 out of 10. I think after like the hour mark, I mentally checked out, and I really have no desire to watch this again anytime soon. But up next we have X-Men First Class, which will be a nice return to form for the franchise. I'll have that review out within the next few days, along with more 2020 reviews coming soon. So let me know, did you see X-Men Origins, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like the action? Did you enjoy the story at all? And what's your favorite prequel movie? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.